Firstly, on behalf of Anita Thomas and myself, I'd like to extend a big thank you to the organizers of the Bangalore Literature Festival. Thank you for hosting us. Thank you also for those very kind words of introduction. But so what makes Camera and Quill a little unique? Most ekphrastic poetry is about famous sculptures or paintings, and perhaps there are not too many examples of more than 30 photograph and poem pairs between the same artist. The other unique aspect, I'd like to think, is what I would describe as terse verse. And I, as the poet, deliberately wrote pithier stuff with the intent of perhaps using Camera and Quill and the photo poem pairs to draw people back into art and poetry. At the start of 2018, I kind of returned to the world of writing and poetry, and part of what I was doing at the time was ekphrastic experiments with a number of Asian artists. I shared that work with Anita, and Anita said, wait a minute, just hang on, maybe there might be something we can do together. And I said, all right, you piqued my interest. And so Anita said, let me send you some photographs and you can take a look at them. And I was, all ears at that time, because obviously I knew that Anita was a good photographer. So what was the genesis of Camera and Quill? How did it all begin? Well, Anita and I have actually known each other since 2001, so it took us all of 17 long years to discover that we could actually get into this partnership of photography and poetry and produce a book.
Looking back, Neil, can you think of any aspect of our approach that shaped how the photography and poetry came together?
I suspect that a lot of our early work was influenced by the fact that we weren't attached or married to any specific outcomes. And it was just the sort of joy of the joint creative work that we were putting together that propelled us forward, if you will. One other aspect which I think we should share with the viewers today is the fact that it was only just before we went into the design stage of our work that I realized that, or you shared with me actually, that each of the photographs had a title to it. And I had no clue whatsoever that that was the case.
Yes, I didn't tell you. We all have individual perspectives and we all see things differently. In Camera and Quill, the titles of the 32 photo poems reflect this dual understanding. This, I think, is the essence of our collaboration, wasn't it?
Yeah, Anita, I think in retrospect, I think that was very thoughtful of you, because I'm not sure that it would have, but I think you were mindful of the fact that perhaps had you shared the titles to your photographs, that might have in some shape or form influenced my interpretation. So, thank you for that. So our collaboration proper kicked off, if you will, in early 2019 with Anita sending me the first cluster of photographs, 3 images, if I recall. So what I'm going to do next is read out 2 of those poems corresponding to that first cluster. The first poem is titled Savannah Sun. Savannah Sun. Hiding in the tall and golden grass, the marksman slowly sets his sights. He lets the stirring wind blow past. His shots ring out as though one by one, he snuffs out suns and makes the sudden dark descend. Perhaps to himself, he still pretends that he truly shot out all the lights. So when I first received that image from you, Anita, the very first thing that struck me was the color of the grass, and it reminded me of the savanna of Masai Mara. If you look closely at the image, you see the crosshairs, of the telescopic sights of a rifle. You see the crosshairs, and that immediately, in my imagination, created a marksman. And instead of lions and cubs hiding in that tall grass, I placed a marksman in the grass. And just sort of sharing with you the construction of this particular ekphrastic poem, you've got the perfect symmetry between the vessels on the ground and the lights on top. Of course, there's a lot of movement in this poem. That inspired the line, "Lets the stirring wind blow past." And you've got the sense of this marksman, the single-mindedness of waiting for that moment. His shots ring out as though one, and then you've got the transfer. You've got the trade-off. One by one, he shoots out suns and makes the sudden dark descent. And there is, to my mind at least, an aspect of the corporate lexicon. And I was probably as guilty as anybody else of using it, in terms of he shot out all the lights, very sort of macho, alpha male, he shot out all the lights. And there is a trade-off in these things, and perhaps that's what the final two lines of the poem are trying to express. Perhaps to himself he still pretends that he truly shot out all the lights, and the realization that potentially arrogance could lead to hubris.
This photograph was taken in the National Gallery in Singapore. I was on a travelator and I spotted this intriguing installation art inside a very small window. I got off and walked back for a better look. The perspective changed depending on where you stood. Every inch made a difference. It was both Delphic and it was infinite, and that gave me my title. This photograph was taken in Bali. We had stopped for lunch amidst the lush rice fields of Ubud. There was an abundance of fresh green everywhere. Then there was this solitary, broken, dry half-seed pod on the table, holding out, staking a claim. I loved the invincibility of this flawed half. Definitely the stronger half.
There was no instruction that read, "Tear along this line." Nobody's fault then. The sudden seismic crack that eclipsed all thunder. Everything's gone to seed asunder. So the backstory to this particular photo poem pair is perhaps interesting. So when I first got the image from Anita, I wasn't sure what it was. So I said, "What on earth is that?" And I promptly texted Anita. Pat came, Anita's reply. And she said, "It's a seed pod." And I said, "Oh, okay." And I had to look it up. So having said that, the image, as Anita has mentioned, was so strong. It was as though there was something being torn apart with great force. What happened subsequently was the words "torn asunder" came to mind, and after that, this poem just flowed. Unfortunately, there is no blueprint. There is no standard operating procedure manual which says this will make for a clean break, and it does get messy. There were no instructions that read, "Tear along this line," and of course, the word "asunder" has biblical implications, and let no man tear asunder, or let no man put asunder. It's in sort of, I think, the King James's Bible. And if only, alas, if only.
Yeah.
One thing I think the audience might find of particular interest, Anita, is the fact that all of the photographs in Camera and Quill were actually shot on an iPhone. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay. I usually use a Sony mirrorless DSLR or the Canon EOS M5, but the photographs in this book were all unplanned. All were shot in the moment on a couple of iterations of the iPhone. The iPhone was ideal because I shot almost instinctively without deliberation, and the live photo option gave me multiple frames per shot. It was quick, it was handy, and the phone was always with me.
That's something we certainly had in common. I wrote most of the poetry on an iPhone. No disrespect to Android whatsoever, but that's how it ended up. White wings welded in the light add power to his thrust in flight. As he rises up to rejoin the skein, to flock together as a team again. As a canopy to the goose in front, no one bird ever bears the brunt. Each wingman was a leader once. The wedge is all but happenstance. So the poem Wingman makes use of the rich reservoir of collective nouns associated with geese, and there are quite a few of them. So geese on the ground are referred to as a gaggle, which I think is quite appropriate given all the racket that they make. But also they're also called a flock, which in this poem I use in the form of a verb. But up in the sky, they're referred to as a wedge or a skein. And I think that's just really fascinating. But more importantly, the geese formation and the behavior of migratory geese is used a lot in corporate and leadership training. And I think it's quite poetic and so compassionate that whenever the bird in front tires, another one takes its place. And also inherent within that behavior is the fact that there is no sense of entitlement, or there isn't this feeling of the all-powerful, supreme soul leader, and it is genuine teamwork. And I think corporate leadership tries to emphasize that. What a fantastic shot. I mean, how on earth did you get that photograph?
Well, that's the Serpentine River in London. It was one of many, many early morning walks with a hot coffee. And I remember the flurry of that particular morning, trying to get all the elements of the picture aligned just right. My title, The Filtered AM, references the time of day, the ritual of the percolated coffee, and the diffused morning light.
It occurs to me that neither photography nor poetry are team sports. Harking back to the poem Wingman that's just been read, we're flying solo, okay? And unlike the geese who are flying in formation, these are very solitary activities. And
True.
So tell me, how did the collaboration work out for you? Tell me more about it.
Neil, I think it was that there was no pressure, no expectation. There was an energy that propelled it along. Mm-hmm. There was the anticipation of how each new photograph would be interpreted by you. Mm-hmm. Almost like windows opening in the mind to a new truth, if you will. Mm-hmm. Let me put the same question to you. What was the difference to you?
I'd actually echo a lot of what you've just said. Additionally, I think what really worked, or what made the collaboration work, was that we stuck to our respective roles, and more importantly, we gave each other enough time and space. I mean, I didn't ever get the sense of a deadline, and neither of us was, ultimately very judgmental. And I think, especially early on, we were just so appreciative and supportive of each other because this was new to both of us, and I think all of that put together went a really long way in making this collaboration successful.
I agree. Was there anything that didn't work that well? Did we always see eye to eye? Remember that photograph of the fan?
Yeah, that's actually a very good example to bring out. I think pretty much in every instance, or most instances, my poetic response to the photo nudge from Anita resonated with her. I'd like to think. But there's one instance and it's brought out in the book, where one image produced two poems, and there's an interesting backstory to that. So next I'll read the poem titled Dervish 1. Dervish 1. You drone on and on from on high, spewing bullets every time you turn, the whirling dervish of these skies, splaying blades that cut and churn this hot summer night into bits of pie. So Anita, when I first got that image of the fan, just one word popped into my head, and that word was fedora. Now, I probably lost some of you viewers here. Fedora was this fantastic Billy Wilder movie going back to 1978. Oops, and there again, I go dating myself. So the protagonist in this movie, William Holden, there's this really dramatic scene where he's been coshed on the head. In fact, he's knocked unconscious for a week. And when he comes to, the first thing that he sees is this black, dark shadow of the fan, which slowly comes into focus as his eyes open. And the whole aspect of it is ominous, sinister. And so that obviously drove the poem. But there are a couple of other aspects. As a child, I had this irrational fear that the ceiling fan would fall on me, and you can call that a vital statistics phobia, whatever you want. Asterix comic fans out there will probably know what I'm talking about. But more seriously, the poem is anchored by the line, the whirling dervish of the skies. The whole aspect around this subsect of Sufism is around the whirling dance, the howling dance. So the expression whirling dervish actually comes from the Arabic darwish, and that anchors the poem. The other bit is obviously drone, and in modern military warfare, drones have become this weapon of destruction, and that also played a role in the way the poem came together. However, you of course had an entirely different view.
Quiet Despair, one of my two titles for this photograph, refers to the hum of the fan. It was a steady soundtrack to the afternoons I lay beside my mother as she rested after her chemotherapy sessions. It offered a quiet calmness every afternoon during a very difficult period. A fan for me is always a source of comfort, always. I love the fan.
So on my way to work, through the next 3 traffic lights, Dervish 2 emerged, and I sent the poem along with a text message to Anita and said, "This one's for you, Dervish 2. Dervish 2. My constant friend, cooling drone, spreading hypnosis from up on high, spreading calm with every turn, the whirling dervish of these skies, serving up a trance at the churn, hot summer nights, grateful sighs."
For me, the second time around, the fan continued to be a source of comfort. In the unrelenting summer heat of Chennai, it was a steady friend, soporific, unfailing, cooling, hypnotic, reliable. So we decided to include both viewpoints in the book. 1 picture, 2 poems, and 4 titles between us.
Absolutely. And as I hinted at earlier, you've got the personification of the dervish, but there's also a calmness. And the words trance, hypnosis, calm actually apply quite readily to the concept of the mystical dervish as part of Sufism.
Matador of the Sea, to you, Hither unto me, for me, was an instant hit though, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I think that one resonated from the get-go. So I'd just like to recite Matador of the Sea. Matador of the Sea. White muleta whirling in wind and air, standing rock steady against the tide, threshing through waves as if to dare fish to jump out from where they hide. Spring cleaning the carpet of the sea, he flails at its fabric with his thresh, smoothens out folds so he can free, then coax all creatures to his mesh.
This photograph was taken in Cochin. Watching the fisherman cast his net over and over and over again, I was struck by the thought that this was like the living of life repetitively, day by day by day. And I wondered, if there is no hope, what then remains?
Anita, I had a slightly contrarian view to that, and I think that's enshrined in what I call the ritual of routine. Beauty in motion by somebody who's absolutely masterful. It's like watching someone when they're in the zone. There's that repetition, that rhythm has a musical aspect to it. And in Western classical music, you refer to the ostinato, which is that continual repetitive rhythm, which is musical. So for me, as I wrote the poem at least, those were some of the strands that I pulled together in talking about the Matador of the Sea.
There's a reason now I know why I like jazz.
Ostinato. Yeah.
Yep.
We will rock you.
Neil, there was one poem though that ended up being substantially different from the original version, right?
Yeah. So that's a poem titled Didgeridoo. It was a 3-stanza poem that we reduced to the 1 stanza. And sometimes, as they say, less is more. I was focused on the elephant's revival and the imagery of his trunk as a trumpet, and the fact that post-revival there would be a tantara sound. I just got too wrapped up in that. And I'm glad you asked me to re-look at that poem and then condensing it to the 4 lines that it is now. And more importantly, the imagery is one of deep compassion, and actually the compassion is mutual, so that, yeah, I think it worked out well.
It did.
Didgeridoo. Grey heads bent in whispered word. Who comforts whom is never clear. Mahout to mammoth, something stirred. When it mattered, you were there.
A very close friend of mine, Shipurna. She has worked for animals all her life. She lives in Bangalore, and her elephant facility in Malur provides a home for maltreated temple elephants. This photograph was shot there. Her daughter, a vet, once described how excited the elephants get when they visit them and how they spend time sharing breaths, trunk to mouth. And then I saw Shipurna actually doing it. My photograph focuses on this very beautiful bond between an elephant, a mistreated one, but one that still trusts, and a human. I call it a song for Anisha.
Anita, during the course of our putting together Camera and Quill, I think we had some really extraordinary imagery and photographs, and I think it's an opportune moment, although this is a time-limited session, for you to share one of the shots that I think were quite unique. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call a selfie.
There was a special show put on by a Maiko, or a geisha in training, when I was in Kyoto. And a young, tonsured American sitting in front of us was absolutely absorbed by her. This photograph captures a moment of intense interaction between them. She almost seemed to be performing just for him.
Anguish of the mime. I would look to you for cues, but you never made a sound. You never gave me any clues, though I'd flap my arms around. I shared with you my every dream, but then you never said a word. Since I'm not allowed to scream, I guess my anguish went unheard. Now I'll signal to you by semaphore, and you'll tilt your tonsured head. You know I wanted you so much more, but now my love for you is dead. Anita, Anguish of the Mime and the inspiring image, for me, is arguably one of the best photographs in the collection, because what it represents is that capture of one moment, and the story is just dying to be told. At least for the poet, it's almost irresistible. What I did with that image was I immediately cast them in the role of lovers. I made the protagonist into a mime artist, and I speak through her voice. And obviously, voice in inverted commas, because a mime artist by definition doesn't have a voice. So much of human communication is nonverbals. In fact, 70% of, and certainly you can see it in my case, 70% of human communication is nonverbals. And we all look for tells, we look for cues, we look for clues, and all of that features within the lines of the poem. And arguably, a mime artist should have an advantage, and therein lies the tragedy of the anguish of the mime, because communication is a two-way street. So, she's trying to communicate, but can't, and isn't able to land what she wants to say despite her best efforts, and that's brought out in the poem. And when you come to the body language, the tilt of the tonsured head is very meaningful, because you're not really listening. Ostensibly you are, but when you're tilting your head, the sort of 101 of body language is you've already made up your mind. And you're probably wanting to express an opposing view, and you're just listening to speak. And that's obvious to the recipient. And therein lies the construct and the tragedy of the tableau that's been put together. And so, you know, for me, although brief, it's a love story gone all wrong. So Anita, before we end, any sort of final thoughts or words from you in terms of what this collaboration truly meant to you?
Yeah. Just one quote that I'd like to repeat. Paul Klee said, "Art does not reproduce what we see, rather it makes us see." I would say that this is a very succinct description of what we did together.
Well, Anita, I have a return gift for you. I also have a quotation. It's a quote by Francis Chan, and he goes on to say, "We had different gifts, but similar convictions." And I think that's just beautiful, and probably, to my mind, summarizes the co-creation, our partnership. So over to Bangalore, and we're on to our Q&A.
Hello Anita, hello Neil. It was my pleasure to get an insight into hearing the backstory behind the collection of the poems and the photographs. I have two questions. I would like to start with Ms. Anita. You had mentioned that all the photos were taken on the iPhone for this particular book. Is there any specific photography tips which is specific to iPhone itself that you would like to share?
Actually, no, because all these photographs were not planned. So you just clicked as you saw. But what I did do was edit it after it, and you get the light, get a number of frames. So you're able to choose the one that suits you the most and then edit that picture. So there were no particular tips really, except lighting and so on.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. And coming to you, sir, it was very interesting to note that you have a financial background and that you are a retired career banker, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, that's right.
I would like to know that how was it the transition from the financial world to the world of literature?
It's a good question. So I think it kind of links back to what a lot of people talk about in terms of how do you achieve a work-life balance? And I've always kind of been a bit bemused when people talk about a work-life balance, particularly because your work is an integral part of your life. So if you talk about sort of work and other passions and interests, that's a very different construct. But in my particular case, and I'm sure the story is different as you go around, but in my case, it's sort of like when we all join professions, careers, etc. You flourish your CV, you've got everything on it, elocution, drama, in my case, authorship as well at a very fledgling level. And I suspect that there's that sort of 22 or 23-year-old who doesn't quite go away, and he's always out there, and he's tapping you on the shoulder and sort of saying, "I'm here." And there's a little bit of a reminder, and I think in particular, the circumstances we all find ourselves in, I think it's meant different things for different people. For me personally, the pandemic did a few things. Number one, it gave me a couple of hours on either end of my day. So I didn't have any commute time anymore because we were working from home, and we were all sort of traversing that cusp, if you will, between living in office, what I term living in office and working from home. And those lines got blurred. And just to keep my sanity, I made sure that I kind of immersed myself back into my sort of original passion of poetry. So that's kind of what it meant to me personally. The transition has been reasonably smooth. I do keep an interest, by the way, whilst I am a retired career banker, I do maintain an interest in things corporate and do consulting for a few organizations as well. So I don't think you've got to take those away. In fact, more elaborate answer, there's this wonderful poet called David White who divides his time between Wales and the West Coast. And he's written a fantastic book, which I would recommend to all of you, called The Three Marriages. And essentially, very quickly, you're married, hopefully to some significant other. It doesn't have to be a spouse or whatever. You're married to some significant other. You're married to your profession. And if your profession is your vocation, like an artist, voila, that's magic. But you're also married to yourself. And I think in terms of being married to yourself, you owe it to yourself to, make that time and space to pursue your passion. A very long answer, but I hope I covered enough bases to answer your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I have another question. My name is Dhruv, and thank you both for sharing your work with us. Actually, mine is about a little bit more about the creative process behind your work. This question is directed to both of you. I was wondering, when you create work, do you think in images or in words? How do you think primarily? And maybe Anita, you could answer first.
Okay, when I create work, for me, it's not a very deliberate or a conscious process. Something stirs the interest, something gets my attention, then I investigate, I explore, I come back to it. I work on it a lot because it's not the first iteration that I accept. But I think it's being alive to the moment, and especially as Neil said, in this pandemic, you have plenty of time to reflect on where you are, where you're going, what you're doing, and especially what is important to you. So I think it are those moments that touch off your curiosity, your desire to know more, and then your determination to know more, if that kind of explains it. Neil, over to you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Anita. So at the risk of being mildly formulaic with regard to the creative process, certainly as far as ekphrastic poetry is concerned, and I do a lot of ekphrastic work, and you have obviously an inspiring image. So there is an image in ekphrastic poetry that kicks off the process. But you can't just sort of describe the image you're seeing, whether that's a painting or a piece of sculpture, or in our case, photographs, because that would be quite mundane. It would be a sort of word picture of what you've seen. And it's really about sort of letting your imagination take over. So if you will, there's the inspiring image, your imagination. And invariably, as Anita said during the course of the recording, which you've just seen, that each interpretation is quite unique. So you sort of pull all of those together. And I think there's a story there. And it's about accessing the story, your interpretation of the story, of course, but sort of releasing the story within the frame. And that frame could be a painting, it could be a picture, or whatever. And it's associating with the emotion that you feel is there in the image. And once you've got that, the flow just happens. Yeah.
If I could just add one more, Neil, taking off from yours, is that when I work, I use music, I apply visuals, and I write as well. I'm an author, so words are very important to me. So as Neil said, it's the emotion, what triggers your response, and the way you respond, I think, determines the creative process.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see we're sort of building off what each other is saying. And it's certainly in a collaboration that's very, very important. And perhaps to add one more aspect to it, writing is always multisensory. It doesn't matter what you're writing, it's always a very multisensory process. So you see, and yes, a picture speaks to you and you hear things. And we talked about the music in the Matador of the Sea, for example. There is that aspect. So you've got to sort of approach it and release that multisensory perception that we all have, actually. It's kind of, I don't know how much time we've got, but on the back of the book, and I hope that there are copies available at the Lit Fest. I hope some of you will have the opportunity to actually peruse, if not buy the book. But there's a short poem which answers your question spot on, and with the permission of both Anita and the moderator, I'm just going to read that out. And it's titled appropriately Camera and Quill. So this is the creative process summarized. I couldn't, and both of us actually had a hand in putting these words together. So this is how it goes. Your third eye slowly opens as you move into the zone. Freeze frame fragments flit on by, seeking out your phone. You capture all the images, the ones you've always known, moment upon moment that you've now made your own. The grainy photos then teased away at the oyster of my mind. Their tales untold, their secrets were lying, hidden and confined. Their rhythm and their rhyme were just waiting to be mine. That's why the poetry and the photographs had to be combined. So hopefully that's perhaps too long an answer, but hopefully it does touch upon what you were looking for. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Neil and Anita. That's all the time we have got. We have another session coming up with Dr. Gagandeep Kang. So thank you so much for joining us at the end of the recorded video. Thanks,
All
Anita.
the very best. Thank you. Thank you to all of you.